Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, March 18th, 2026, and today we're all about improving the soil this spring, decompacting the soil without making it worse, some basics of soil amending, and even managing rocky soil. So let's do it. All right, happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. It's pretty cold here, well below freezing, but that's about to change, I think, with temps jumping straight into t-shirt weather this weekend. The house guests, the plants that we've had to move in for the nights, will be moved back out today, fully likely for the rest of the year. We just always get that one stretch that's a little too cold to feel comfortable, like leaving them outside in the greenhouse overnight, even with some external heating. Like, there just really is no excuse to lose the tomatoes and peppers at this point. That's just not entirely justifiable. But I'm in the need of starting more seeds soon, so I'm just about ready for this whole cold thing to be done. Though I'll take spring temps as long as I can get them. I also ordered some dry land rice seed yesterday, just for goofs. I've always wanted to grow rice. We'll just give it a bed, see how it goes. But I have this vision of growing some grains, like on a larger scale, maybe renting some land or something one day. So dry land rice has my attention a little bit. Anyway, more on all that another time. Don't forget to join the annual No-Till Growers Bracket Challenge. The link is in the show notes, and as always, feel free to send your 20-second farm video clips to Farmer Mike at notillgrowers.com, and he will work those into the show. So love to see those. Also, as you can tell, my voice is not fully there yet, but I did a hybrid episode yesterday just to kind of see how it would go. And it went fine, but I just thought today I'd ease back a little bit just to make sure, give my voice as much time as possible to rest. It's getting better, no doubt, but no need to push it. So today is going to be a compilation episode. You're going to hear mostly from my old me, kicking it off, talking about how to improve your soil this spring. Enjoy.
A question that comes up every year, usually when people start breaking ground or replanting a garden after failure the year before, is how do I improve my soil? The good news is that there are a lot of very simple things you can do and some more intensive things that you can do and pretty much everything in between to improve your soil this spring. So I thought I would give you just some general advice going into the growing season here in the US for how to improve your soil sort of as you grow. A substantial portion of your soil's health starts in the beginning of a garden's life. And although most of us cannot go back in time, at least I don't think so, possibly the easiest way to improve your soil is not to damage it to begin with. There is, in fact, a brand new plot in the town where I live that I saw. And every time I drive by it, all I can think about is how rough that soil is going to be to grow on, because I can tell that they plowed it way too wet. Like, it is just mucky, smeary soil. So chances are that they will be dealing with that mistake for many years to come. A lot of times, especially on denser soils like clay, for instance, like that is, the late winter or early spring is not the time to plow it up if you plan to go that route at all. Sometimes in a drier spring, you can get away with it, but it's a job that should be reserved for when the soil is moist, but does not smear between your fingers. If that happens in your fingers, like the smearing, imagine what's going to happen with a metal plow dragging through it, causing compaction and chunkiness for years to come. So that's the first thing. I just don't start on the wrong foot. I've done many videos on starting gardens though. So for now, let's just assume the mistake is made and it's time to fix it, or you just generally want to improve your soil. As they say in soccer though, the next play is the most important one. So next play, you can and should address compaction. Compaction is to me one of the most common soil problems on farms. In terms of crop production, it has a huge limiting factor for reasons that I've talked about, but we'll talk about again in the future. If a field was plowed at the wrong time, for instance, or had animals concentrated on it, tractors, heavy stuff of any kind, it likely has some amount of compaction. But if you can't push a piece of rebar 8 or so inches into the soil, it is likely compacted and needs to be decompacted with something like a broad fork. Plants can do that job generally, but just on a larger timeline, a longer timeline, like it's going to take... Like, plants can slowly decompact soil, but it can take a long time. And not every plant is good for that. And things like tillage radish aren't necessarily the answer either, because they don't necessarily like to grow in like mucky, compacted soil either. So anyway, continuing on, bare soil, never leave it bare. Bare soil means that you are losing soil organic matter to the atmosphere as microbes consume it and release it as CO2. Poof, all your hard work up in smoke. Gas. This goes back to one of the core principles of conservation agriculture: keep the soil planted as much as possible. Nothing will improve soil health quite as well as living plant roots. And so make sure to keep them in the ground as much as you can throughout the season. Diversity is often cited as a core principle as well. And I agree with that. Diversity has a lot of benefits to soil life, nutrient availability, and more. But again, we'll talk about interplanting later. But that often just means different crops in the same bed throughout the course of the year. And they don't necessarily have to be in there at the same time. Of course, try to be selective here with diversity and keeping living roots in the soil. Like, don't just let weeds go bananas in the garden, which will be good for the soil, but bad for the grower. But try to keep the soil full of a diversity of plants as much as makes sense for you in your context. Also, use mulches as much as you possibly can, right? Keep the soil covered as much as possible is a core principle. I did a whole video breakdown on how to use mulches at one point, which you should watch before just throwing any old mulch down, because every mulch has its pros and cons. But mulches not only can create soil organic matter, so long as they are not plastic, obviously, as they decompose, but they hold in moisture for plants and microbes to use for their growth. Mulches likewise help keep soil and particles in place, which isn't the worst idea in the world, keeping your soil there. Soil particles not only provide nutrients to plants via microbes, because soil particles are really just really, really tiny bits of rock that they kind of break up and release the nutrients that plants in a plant available form, to put it very simply. But those soil particles also become the building blocks, the building material for aggregates in the soil. So yeah, keep those soil particles in place as much as you can. In fact, that leads nicely into the third principle of soil health and conservation, which is to disturb the soil as little as possible. Decompacting the soil is important, requires some amount of disturbance, but avoid tilling and just overly pulverizing it as much as you can. And if you should have to till it to get the garden started, which can 100% when done right, set the garden off on the right foot so you never have to till it again. Just do it at the right time, i.e. when it's not too wet. But sometimes our soil needs a little help getting to a healthy place. So perhaps a broad forking makes sense for you in some areas. Maybe it is a subsoiler for others who are on a larger scale. Or on a smaller scale, maybe it's just a little fork. Like not like a dinner fork, but like a garden fork. Or perhaps it's just like really, really compacted and low in soil organic matter and you need to kind of start over and work in some compost. Like I am wont to say, don't do what other growers are doing. Don't listen to the dogma. Just do what your soil needs. And that will set you off on the right path so that you never have to disturb it again on any sort of high level. Now, some off the beaten path tips, because I always like to try to add something new to the conversation, a new angle or whatever. But one of them, at least, is to improve your soil through good planning. There is a famous Italian defender, and yes, I brought it back to soccer for a second, but bear with me, named Paolo Maldini, who said, if I have to make a tackle, like slide tackle, I have already made a mistake. In other words, if I have to come sliding in there to get the ball, I was already out of position to begin with. The same idea could be applied to gardening. If someone is having to till up a bed or a garden to start again, it's because the garden was already out of position, so to speak. It hadn't been planned for well, it hadn't been cared for right, and it hadn't been managed properly up until that point. I think every grower gets caught out of position, so to speak, every once in a while, but the better you get at planning, not just in the beginning of the season, but every week, the better off your soil will be, because you will not be forced to make any rash decisions, like a slide tackle, which I wouldn't do in the garden anyway. That could be dangerous. But I don't want to judge. I mean, like I said, context is everything. Also, use some amount of compost. Just get it in there somehow. There has been a trend over the last 2 decades towards treating soils with just mineral applications, and certainly, to an extent, that's fine. But if you do not have the microbes, and the microbes do not have the housing, then you're just adding expensive rock particles to your soil with no workers to release those nutrients for the plants. So, which is where compost come in. Well-made compost can be that microbial housing and food supply. Moreover, very recent studies have shown, or more accurately, they continue to show, compost applications can reduce soil-borne pathogens, improve soil structure, provide long-term microbial habitat, as well as plant nutrition, among other benefits. So, in effect, use some amount of good compost, if you can, somewhere, whether it's in the soil, on the soil, even in the plant starts, or in the holes where you plant the plants. Get it in there.
Hey there, soil nerds. It's Lisa from Thornberry Farm here in Seaside, Oregon, potting up some tomato starts in the greenhouse today. Some more starts to go, and sweet peas here on the back bench waiting to be pinched and moved to the field.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything: custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. With their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you to put your best food forward. Schedule a demo today at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show.
Anyway, today's second Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Andy Novak at Mother Farm, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, we're looking to break new ground soon, and I have a question on subsoiling. I read in your book that your ideal bed establishment protocol would involve subsoiling, but I also read in your book that subsoiling can also create compaction if done when too wet. For context, we have heavy clay soil and are in a wet and cool stretch right now, including standing water in a lot of areas. Our ideal plan was to subsoil, apply compost and amendments, till that in, and then cover crop the plot. Would you forego the subsoiling in this wet stretch? We are dealing with drainage issues in our other garden plots, and I thought subsoiling would be a great tool to mitigate that in our future plots, but don't want to do more damage by pushing it in a wet year. Thanks," end quote. All right, thanks to you, Andy. And a somewhat poignant question here to follow the last one. Sometimes to get soil humming and to the point that you don't have to till it regularly or till it really at all, it may take a little work on that soil in the beginning. That said, as I told Andy when this question first came in, because Andy put the little alarm bell, I would probably forego the subsoiling in this case if you absolutely have to break into it while it's wet. And then just assume that you will have to broad fork for a couple years after that. The compaction caused by working it too wet will create more work for you for many years to come at a very deep level, which is spectacularly difficult to manage. The alternative would be just to wait until the conditions are better to do any soil work and then do the soil work as you described with the amendments. Again, beyond the subsoiling, which for those of you who don't know, it's basically like a long shank that sort of just breaks up the soil. You just drag it through the soil and it breaks it up deep underground without turning it over. But beyond the subsoiling, especially if tilling is the next step, as I write in the book, you don't want to create compaction slicks that hold water. If you want to know what that looks like, especially for something like a tiller, just rub some wet clay in between your fingers and you can see how easy it is to make, pottery. Then just imagine that with a tilling machine or a subsoiler drug through at the wrong time. It creates this really deep slick that basically turns to pottery and is really hard for water and roots and those sorts of things to penetrate. That all leads to like anaerobic pockets, water that just kind of sits there, and that can lead to, nothing good. So pathogens and low oxygen environments and ultimately plant death. I would also definitely address any drainage issues before starting the garden if possible. That is really hard to fix while the garden is up and running. I had a mentor say that it's hard to work on a moving train. Once the soil is moving, once the soil is planted and you're growing stuff, it's really hard to do these like baseline foundational things. The subsoiling could help on the drainage front, but it could also make the problem worse. Again, especially if it's done at the wrong time, or even if it's done well, it's possible it'll have no real effect on the drainage because maybe it's a low spot or just, generally a wet spot at certain times of the year. I have a few areas like that where it doesn't matter how much good soil work we do. There is a seep there in the spring and it will just be wet. It's just going to be wet. If you need that area early or when it's very wet, you may need to investigate the drainage a little more and where the water is coming from, or just, not use that spot in the early spring. We will actually touch a bit on the importance of really getting the garden set up in the next segment and taking your time, because difficult soils can remain difficult for a very long time. So if you can be patient in getting the garden set up, it will really show in your production and sanity over the long haul. Anyway, let me know your all's thoughts or questions. All right, our final Patreon question of the day comes to us from Nathan Leal Crisp, who writes, quote, "Hey, Farmer Jesse, I've been reading and revisiting your book whenever I have free time." Parenthetically, they write, "It's one of the best, most useful and helpful purchases I've made." Thank you for that. That's awesome. My question has to deal with fertility management section in the supporting healthy growth area. I am trying to convert your example amendments to be able to use at my own area, and I came up with this: 3 pounds divided by 250 square feet equals 0.012 pounds per square foot. And Nathan just gives a breakdown of that. They basically just translated that to square footage. And you can find what I was talking about in the Living Soil Handbook. Anyway, Nathan goes on, I understand this is just one aspect of a good fertility management plan. I'm trying to find a general application that supports healthy growth of vegetables. The soil life, I'll supplement as the season progresses if needed. Planning to use AEA, that's Advancing Eco Agriculture products, Jadam, etc. as well to help support healthy growth. You also mentioned adding grass and bean meals. How do you add these to the equation? Are there any changes in your approach now that you have one or two more gray hairs? I'm dealing with clay/loam soil that's been beat up and tarped for around 6 months. It also has a slightly sour smell that needs some TLC, but I don't have the time or money for compost. One more question. Is there a fact sheet or calculator for organic meals and amendments with genuine information alongside other amendments in context such as lime, gypsum, soil pH, soil type, reactions between amendments, interaction with soil life, biology, etc.? Thank you and God bless, end quote. All right, great questions here, Nathan, and thanks so much for the kind words about the book. So the challenge with soil and gardens is that there just really is no good general amendment routine that could be used in, say, Colorado to the same effect as in, say, Louisiana or wherever. Not saying the same amendment package won't work, but the soils are different, the rainfall is different, the pH, all of it. So you could be pushing something out of balance while ignoring a deficiency, or you could just be wasting money on stuff you don't need. Here's what I would recommend instead to develop a simple amendment routine for yourself. Get a soil test from somewhere like Logan Labs if you are in the US. If I like Logan Labs because you can also then subscribe to Organic Calc. It's actually spelled Organic Alc, but that sounds like an alcohol thing. Anyway, Organic Calc on growabundant.com, which is a great resource. Notably, not a sponsor, but for like $30, you can get all the Logan Lab test results analyzed with organic recommendations you want. But you could test several soil tests that way, or get the amendments and recommendations for several soil tests over the course of a year, which is cool. So in starting and maintaining a garden, that's a great deal. That will give you an idea of what your soil needs in your context at a relatively affordable price. Then that will give you also give you a yearly look at what you need and how the amendments you are using are doing. A lot of the work can be done in the beginning of a garden's life, in terms of amending it and get you through the many, many years that way. If you add the amendments at the beginning, and then you just kind of measure that over time and see how well they're holding. Most of those rock amendments will stay there pretty much forever. Things like nitrogen, sulfur, and boron are the few that are very mobile and need to be managed on a near yearly basis. But for the most part, a good compost will take care of nitrogen, but also some of the sulfur and boron if it is made with a good diversity of ingredients. Now, I know you said you can't afford compost at the moment, but those amendments will also add up. So it's at least worth breaking it down cost-wise and figuring out which will be more expensive ultimately. If it's the dry amendments and meals, then that's a fine place to start. You can then start making your own composts in the meantime and stockpiling those for the future. So to the part of your question about resources, the growabundant.com site I mentioned is where you could find the Organic Calc. Yep. And yeah, that's just a good overall resource. Then there are also places like Ohio Earth Foods, previously a sponsor. So just full disclosure there. And Seven Springs Farm Supply, not a sponsor that I can remember. So full disclosure there too, I guess. Both of those organizations will be able to help you if you give them a call. They both sell the products, so they'd be able to tell you which would work in your context for what your soil test said. Maybe I'm putting a lot of pressure on them, but you could at least try it. To the part about what I've learned with my additional gray hairs, which I should say is probably more than one or two in the last 5 years since I wrote my book, maybe like 7, but like just really big ones. Anyway, what I've learned is just the importance of getting it right in the beginning, and then the importance of having at least one great compost pile every season. Just one you really take your time with to make sure it is as healthy and vibrant as possible for the more complicated crops like tomatoes and squash and peppers, the ones you really want to last all season. I do still occasionally add that same amendment mix I discussed, but less so. I like a diversity of amendments, but I really just get such a great crop response from compost that is where I like to put my energy these days. I also don't like to become overly reliant on mined nutrients, minerals or whatever, rocks, or processed meals. Those are nice to have, certainly in the beginning, and for sure they can be effective, and they often give consistent, reliable results. But also, there's a lot that gets wasted in my region, such as wood chips and leaves. So I also like to force myself to find ways to integrate those more as well to address some of those nutrient issues. Compost seems to be my best bet, but mulches help too. So to simplify, if you want to, if you want your own regimen, do the soil test thing. That way you are not guessing and potentially overloading or neglecting nutrients that your soil needs. If you really, really want a good all-around nutritional approach with less labor, a good well-made, or should I say well-composed, nutritional compost is the answer all day long for me.
Zone 8B in the burbs. It's mid-March. This is the greens bed. Spinach, shallots, and a couple of beds of broccoli, Napa cabbage, Swiss chard, collards, kale, and radicchio.
Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. If you'd rather be on the farm than inside doing your taxes, you are not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show.
Today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Norskgard Farm, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, I wanted to share my dilemma. We are converting an old hayfield, 1830 house was built, with good soil, but oh man, a ton of small shale stone. I could not get a spade into the soil, and when I used a drill with an auger attachment to take samples, it injured my wrist as the auger was stopped by the stones. I tilled 6 30-foot by 100-foot beds, killed the hay, and then used a backhoe to dig down 12 inches to loosen things up. I sifted a small portion by hand and felt like I was knocking on death's door. Smiley face emoji. We planted garlic, amended that area, and it is coming up nicely. So now I believe the next step is to trummel the soil for the beds, not paths between the beds, digging again with a tractor, remove rocks to 3/4 of an inch, replace, then amend the remaining soil. I'm committed to this. I considered adding soil on top of existing soil, but that was cost prohibitive and I could not confirm the quality of the soil. I feel this is a necessary baseline requirement for manageable no-till, and from trummel forward, mostly handwork and tilter. I also see around 20 to 25% volume loss with the shale removal. There is that much, they emphasize. So for carrots, this may still not be deep enough. Still, good clean soil. We tested for pesticides, excellent results, and I don't want to lose that. Brother, what am I missing? Probably a spine replacement. Maybe a lobotomy? Another emoji? Thank you, Zone 5B. Thank you so very much, Robin Felicia Soma, Norskgard Farm, end quote. All right, thanks, Robin Felicia. And also, now, how have we made it this far into this podcast without talking about managing rocks and soil? I don't know. Anyway, I have worked on 2 rocky farms and, well, not my favorite thing. So I don't necessarily think you're missing anything here. Rocks are a pain and the wrist situation is real. A lot of times I recommend getting the extra handle for your drill if you're going to use that auger bit just to save your wrists, no matter the soil, because it's really hard on your wrists, but especially in rocky soils. In my experience, dealing with rocks is basically fine if they are a certain size or in a limited concentration. But once they pass that threshold, it becomes basically impossible to farm those areas without removing some or all of the rocks. What that threshold is, well, that's different for everyone, of course, but also for the types of crops you intend to grow and how you prepare your soil. For instance, if you were wanting to grow crops that are planted relatively deep, like tomatoes, or are harvested mechanically, like potatoes or sweet potatoes, rocks may determine a lot about your production, or if you need to get rid of the rocks. Shallow-rooted crops in rocky ground are a little more forgiving. For instance, our last farm was rocky. Rocky, I guess, is kind of like small bouldery, meaning there were not a ton of like little bitty rocks, but rather a handful of large limestone chunks that I would find, much like you did with the auger, with one implement or another. My favorite being when I would find one with the rotary plow and it would whip the entire BCS tractor into my kidneys. Like just the handle would just slam me right in the side. Anyway, I find larger rocks like that, like it sounds like you are dealing with, a lot harder to deal with than smaller ones. But in that time, I got really good at growing summer lettuce and squash because the rocks were not a problem for those crops that are kind of more shallow rooted. For the deeper rooted crops, I just had to avoid certain areas with certain crops, or I get them out out, which would have taken serious machines getting involved with a few spots on that farm and a huge loss of volume as you discovered. But for those smaller rocks, I could kind of just choose the bed, kind of like what you're doing, pick those rocks out and kind of carry on from there, even with a little bit of that volume loss, which would have not been quite as much as what you were talking, but there's still a fair amount of volume loss. Generally speaking, smaller rocks are, in at least a small concentration, are not necessarily a problem, and they may, in fact, add a little nutrition or at least habitat to the soil if they are clogging your implements, though the tilther is a tool especially attuned to getting clogged with small rocks. So obviously in those situations, you have to remove them to at least a few inches down, but that's going to be your call. And again, depends on what you're trying to grow. On a small scale, assuming that you can't just mulch over top of it with compost, smaller rock removal can be done by hand, bed by bed, with some volunteers and maybe some adult beverages, if that's your thing. On a larger scale, the work will have to be done with some sort of rock removal implement. One option is a skeleton bucket on a tractor. It kind of looks like a normal front end loader style bucket, but like a skeleton of it where stuff can fall through the cracks. However, something like this requires a lot of driving over and over the same farm plots and would likely create significant compaction, and not to mention the amount of times you would have to go up and down with the bucket to sort of shake it and get the rocks, the dirt to fall through and the rocks to stay could really wear the tractor and hydraulic system out. So perhaps something like a continuous rock picker implement, albeit more expensive, would be better in the long run. Maybe you could share it with other neighbors who are no doubt going through the same thing. These are implements that can either pick up rocks off the ground, like off the surface once they're there, or pick the rocks out. It's sort of like as you till, or that sort of scrape the soil surface and basically sift it. These require a lot of upfront tillage and not to mention upfront expense, but will set you up for long-term success where you can reduce your tillage and increase your productivity over time. But yes, rocks can be a massive pain and in some cases may determine where you should even place a farm or garden or what you can do with that land. When I'm evaluating a new piece of property, which hopefully I will never have to do again, but when I am absolutely looking at the rock situation, going out into the field and digging around with like a spade shovel. Homeowners love this, to see what I'm up against. The last farm we were on had spots that were really hard to farm for the rocks, whereas the new farm does not have any rocks at all, really. I think I've run into one, not even really small ones. But again, some rocky soils can be very nice, like it sounds like Rob and Felicia that you all have, so it does not have to be a deal breaker. And as an additional resource, check out the NRCS Web Soil Survey, which can give you a lot of info about the soil type and properties of a certain property. It's just something you will have to decide how you plan to manage the rock populations without, as alluded to in this question, terminating yourself or your back. Not easy to grow food from the afterlife, I assume, or lay down on your couch, which I know firsthand. So yeah, anyway, thoughts and or experiences managing rocks in a garden.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that compilation episode. Really appreciate your patience on the whole voice thing. It's not been super fun for me, but we're, getting better. Thank you all. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That always helps us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, which we still have some of left. Maybe I'll have my voice back by the end of it. We'll see. You usually get a shout out on the show, but obviously we're going to hold off on shout outs and stories until I can do a full episode. So stay tuned and thank you all again for your patience. Much love. See you tomorrow. Bye.